Hey everyone, this is Alex USA Days, and we're continuing with Playwright QA automation. Now we're going to do API verification. So this is module 10, Playwright API testing, and this is the last module in the series. After we're done with this module, you should be all set to get started with Playwright automation. The whole series should give you a very solid foundation, so you should be ready for a work project or any sort of Playwright automation you're trying to start on. Now, API verification. API stands for Application Programming Interface. In web, API is a set of rules and protocols that allow different software applications to communicate. API allows web browsers, a client, to communicate with the server. So for example, you have a browser or you're on a machine or on your phone and you're trying to open a web page. So your client, the browser, will send a request to the server. Server will confirm all the information being received, that it is correct, what are you asking for, and then the server will send a response. So this continuous communication is done in API layer. So there's request and response from the browser to the server, and then from the server to the browser. Now, one of the most popular API approaches is called REST. REST API stands for Representational State Transfer. It's a type of web API that follows a set of architectural principles and constraints. It is designed to create a simple and standardized way for software to communicate. REST API use standard HTTP methods to perform actions on resources. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. It is the language that web browsers and web servers use to talk to each other on the internet. The primary HTTP methods used are GET, that will allow you to retrieve data from a resource or a server. POST will allow you to create a new resource. So if you want to add a new record to the server, create a new profile. PUT will update or replace an existing resource. Delete if you want to remove a resource, or patch to do a partial update on the resource. With an API request method, there is a response with a status code. HTTP status codes are 3-digit numbers returned by a web server in response to client's request made to the server. They provide information about the result of the request and help both the client and the server understand how to proceed. Response status codes and examples below, but this is not a full list. 100 status codes indicate some sort of information being passed, like 100 for continue or 101 for switching. 200 status codes indicate successful response, so that could be 200 if you received the resource, 201 if you created one. 300 codes are redirection messages. For example, 300 multiple choices, 301 moved permanently, and so on. 400 is the client error responses. For example, 401 would be unauthorized when you're trying to log in but you don't have access, right? Or, for example, 404 that many of us actually did see in real life. That means you're trying to reach a link and the resource was not found, right? The client saying the link is not there. 500 errors are server error responses, so that would be something happening with the backend, with the server side, and it's not working properly. For example, 502 for bad gateway or 504 for gateway timeout. For more details, go to developer.mozilla.org and look for HTTP status codes. They have a pretty solid documentation with explanation on all the status codes, different methods, and so on. We're just going to use this as our introduction to get started. Now, when testing APIs with Playwright, the main objective is to implement and verify various types of requests such as GET, POST, DELETE, or others. The process typically involves the following steps: implementing the request, create and send the API request using Playwright, specifying the necessary method, GET, POST, DELETE, and so on, header, parameters, and body data as required. We will take a look at those when we do it. And then verifying the response. So the response could be the status code, ensure that the response returns the correct HTTP status, and verifying response data. If the response includes data, verify that the data is correct and matches the expected values. We also want to do error handling and edge cases verification. So test various edge cases and error conditions to ensure the API handles them gracefully. This includes sending invalid data, missing required parameters, and simulating server errors to check if the application responds appropriately. Also, we want to do documentation compliance verification. So we want to compare the actual API response against the API documentation to ensure that the implementation aligns with what is specified. This includes verifying endpoints passes, required parameters, response formats, and error codes. Okay, so let's get into it and try it ourselves. Okay. So we're ended here in our POM test and the POM example project. So what we're going to do, we're going to create another project within our project with API example. So let's go ahead and create new folder. Let's call it API examples. And we want to navigate within that folder. So cd API examples, right? Let's clear out the console. So here we will go into install Playwright as we already did. So npm init Playwright at latest. Okay. We're going to use JavaScript. Sure, our test folder is in tests. We don't need Git workflow. Install browsers and installation starts. Okay, perfect. Now for our so here's our project. Let's navigate into the project folder. So open folder, and we're going into Learn Playwright, API examples, select folder. Okay, now I'm inside the API examples folder. I don't want to open the repository here. Let's bring our console back. Okay, we're good. Now, what are we going to do? So one thing that I suggest that you download is the program called Postman. And to do that, you can go into download postman.com downloads. You will find the download button here. Now, Postman is a tool that allows you to work with API. There is a free version, but it's preferably that you do create an account, even if you're going to be using free version. So if you go to pricing, you can see there is a free version that you can use. So if you go to pricing, there's a free version that you can use, and that will be enough. Just create a free account. Now, once you download Postman, you will see a window like that where you can process your requests. I'm going to discard changes, and here I'm clicking on the plus, and this is the window where I can create API requests. So if I will go back to Postman and hit inspect, and we'll go to the network tab and select fetch XHR. So here I'm going to filter all of the requests only to show me XML HTTP requests and the fetch API requests. So essentially, those are requests that going from the client to the server. So those will be our API calls. Let's clear the log and let's refresh this page with the fetch XHR selected. Now you can see a bunch of requests coming through, right? So for example, here is an events, right? And I can see this was a post method and it got reply 200, so it was okay. Here is the URL link or so-called API endpoint. This is where browser is reaching out. Then it will have this is all header information in the header in the request header, and then there will be a payload that it carries. And with that, there might be some response also. So an object that comes with a response. In this case, there is no response, just a payload, right? So this is our API communication between browser and server. You can see it in any web page. If you do refresh, you'll see a bunch of requests coming through. So what we will be doing with Playwright, we will be testing as if we are the client sending requests to the server without the browser, right? For that, we're going to go to a web page called res.in. This is a very good page to practice with API. And they have all sorts of requests here available where they provide the link that you can use for a request. And that's going to emulate or simulate your API request and response. So we can practice on that. For example, there is get list users, right? So here is the request link, and I will show you here it came through in the networking tab, right? And here's the response it will get you back. If I click on this button and get users itself, or actually, I think this one. Okay, if I click on request this link, it will open in a new window. So here you have the whole link and the whole response available. What we're going to do, we will copy this, then we will open Postman and just paste it in our console or command line field, right? Here, send get request. So you can select the type of request. So send, get, and hit send. And it is hitting that endpoint right here, the API, the server, and the server gives us response with all of the list of users, and this is for page 2 right now. If I'll select page 1, for example, and send it, it will give me page 1 back, 6 users displayed per page, total users are 12, total pages are 2. So this is response body, right? That's like an object that is being sent back, a JSON that we're going to use to do our verification. Postman sets header parameters automatically here. All we really need to do is send the link, and that's it. On GET request, you don't even provide anything in the request body itself, and headers are set automatically by Postman. So it goes to that link, and that response is with status 200 OK. So the server says, the request was successful and gives us a whole bunch of records. Okay, so how can we test this, right? One of the approaches would be to go and verify the API request response, get request using Postman, and then grab this information, store it in Playwright, and test against it every time. If your responses are large and they're static, you don't have to test them field by field, like ID1 and so on and so on. If you have a static response that's pretty large and you want to make sure it's consistent, you can copy the whole thing and verify that every time your test run, this whole thing is not changing and it is responding exactly how it should. For that, so we're gonna do some things here. So first, set of examples, let's rename this to API underscore examples.spec.js. I'm going to clear all this out. And in my config, what I want to do, directory is tests. This is good. Not going to have any, well, only one retry if it fails, and number of processes only one for local and for CI/CD. There is no headed or headless mode because we're not going to be using browser for requests and responses here. I'm going to comment this off. I'm still going to have Chromium here, but we're not going to be using a browser per se. We will be doing requests from the API that or a fixture that Postman not Postman, that Playwright has itself. Okay. So let's go to our test file. So we would need to create a request that would go to that link and get the data and then verify the data. So first, let's create, so import test and expect from Playwright test. So we're going to import our Playwright. And let's create a describe block with all the API. So describe API examples, API verification examples. Okay, now here's our arrow function, and that's going to be our describe block that will contain all the tests. So our first test, let's have description was a comment here, will be test to verify users and endpoint is returning expected users, right? Test block, verify multiple records returned against stored static response. So I'm assuming here every time I'm doing this test, data shouldn't be changing. I need to still verify that it's working properly, so I can do something like that. So we need to say async. And here, now, we're not going to be using page. We're not using browser. We will be using built-in fixture called request. There is a fixture for that in Playwright to test with API. Okay, so here's our arrow function, and this is our test body. So first thing, we need to go and grab the response and store it somewhere. So we need to save, say, raw response into a variable. All right, so how can we do that? We can say const response. This is going to be our variable, and here we're going to do request. To do request, we're going to use await, then we will use this fixture request, and now we need to provide method. What kind of method are we using here? We're going to be using get, right? Same thing that we have in Postman, get method and this link. So we're trying to get information from this particular API endpoint, and you need to provide the link inside, right? Now this request is going to run and store all the information, all the response data, including the headers and everything, like all this information, the headers, everything's going to be stored in response, essentially as a raw response, right? We want to parse it because we don't want to work with everything. We want to work only with the body. So to parse the body, and let's leave a comment here. So parse the response body into a JavaScript object, right? With access to the actual data within the response body, right? So we understand what's happening here. And we will store it in a new variable. So I'm going to have a variable called response body, and it is equal to await. And we're grabbing this variable, a raw data, and we say .json. That's it. This command .json will parse it. Now we have a body stored here, and we can see what is stored inside. So let's see what is stored inside. For that, we can just say console.log, and we will log out response body. Okay, let's go ahead and run this test really quick, see what comes up. And here is our response. You see, all the information that was coming back from the server is now stored inside this variable. Okay, perfect. We don't want to print out every time, so let's comment it out. So first thing I want to assert here is I want to make sure that the status code is 200. So the response is successful. So 200, okay. The status code is stored within the raw response, not in the response body. So to verify the response status code, I can do expect response, not request, response dot status, and status, it's a function, and we want to say to be 200, right? Let's run it. And it's passing. Okay, so the status we get back is 200. Now, how do we verify this large amount of data if I don't want to go line by line and verify everything, and I know it's static? So I will just save everything, just highlight it and copy. I can also save it from my console response here, and I'm going to create a new file that will store it. And I'm going to put it in a new folder. I'm going to call it test data. So test data, and within test data, let's create a new file called let's call it users. Is it users? Yeah, users. Okay, let's call it so users response.json. And I'm just going to paste all of that information inside my users response.json. So everything I got from this get request, the body, I'm going to store it here in the variable. Now I need to import it to be able to test against it, right? So import users from, and that would be test data users response.json. Okay, users is declared, so we're importing the JSON file with all the information. Now we want to say expect. So we are making sure that our response body that we're grabbing from this request is actually equal to our stored response body. So we asserting everything. Like for the static assertion, say you have API, response never changes. There's a lot of information there. You need to confirm everything looks good. And let's run the test. So I'm running it through the plugin. If you want to run it through the console, you can just go to terminal and type npx playwright test, as we usually do, right? So it's going to trigger the test, and looks good. So everything passes. If I look at the HTML report, yep, everything looks good. Response is equal. And again, we can't really look inside unless we want to expand it like in the console or something, but everything is matching up. If something is not equal, it's going to fail. For example, the first user is not George, but Sam, right? Now, let me clear it out and let me run one more time. Not the logs. So npx playwright test. Let me run one more time. Okay, and test fails. And it tells me exactly where it failed. So first name is Sam. First name expected was Sam, right? The one that I stored. I'm expecting Sam. That's what is my test data, or data I'm testing against. Is like the source of truth, right? But I get George instead. And it shows where. Okay, good. So now I know the test actually is working. With that being said, we can change it back. So it's back to George, and now it should pass again. Clear it out. Okay, perfect. now we learned how to do a GET request and verify everything. Let me minimize this block. Second one, we will test data for a single user line by line. So we're not going to compare everything with a file. We're just going to make sure assertion is looking good line by line. So if I go here in request response, go back to the API page. So here's a request for a single user. If I click on it, here is the response. I can change to, let's say, 1. So let's say user 1. I'm trying to get user 1, and I'm going to use that link. Go to Postman, paste it here, and run it. Now I have only one user coming back. Not a whole set of them, but just the very first one by the returned by the ID. This guy. Okay. Let's create a test where we go through that user and verify every line by line. Test verify single user line by line. Okay. And async. Again, we're going to need the request from the Playwright, right? Not using page because we're not using browser. And here, pretty much same thing as we done. So we're gonna have to do get request, store it in the response, right, within this block. Instead of this link though, we need to use the other API endpoint, this one right here. So users. Not users page, but just users and then ID. Same endpoint, different parameters, right? Pass through. Okay. Still, we're doing the same thing. We're storing the response, raw response in the response variable, and then we want to parse it and store it in the response body. Okay. So let's check again in the console. Right here, what comes back. And I'm gonna add dot only for this test, so it runs only this test for now. Okay, npx playwright test. And we see that the user did come back, and all the information about the user coming back from the API. Okay, comment it out. So let's do some assertions. Assert users information. Okay, so first let's do response assertion. So same thing, that the status is 200. The response is successful. And then we're going to go into the body. And to go into the body, you kind of have to go into JSON object, right? So you first land on data, then you need to provide the next field. So we are in the body, then we say dot data, and then we say dot field. Kind of going deeper into it, telling what we're trying to grab and verify, right? So we want to say expect. Now we're going to use response body, and we want a response body dot data. So we're going in here dot data, and now we need to provide one of those fields. So dot ID, that would be this one, and you see it's not a string, so it's not actually text, it's a number. There's no quotes around it, right? Here it's yellow, not green, no quotes. So this needs to be dot to be 1. So we're making sure that we're getting, in fact, user number 1, and we're grabbing and verifying the ID. So not describe data.id. Okay, good. So the next one would be email right here, data.email, and the email, we're going to verify that we're getting this one back, George Bluth. Okay, so you can see how you build it out. So expect now next from the email we can verify assert first name. It's going to be George, and after that we're going to assert last name Bluth, and after that we're going to assert avatar. I'm not going to assert support in other text value. I don't think it's important. So I think for the object itself, for this particular user, we've verified everything that it returns, and that we should be good. Okay. So this test is complete, and let's run it. Passed. Perfect. So everything looks nice. Let's do the post request next. So now we'll be able to add data. So post request is when we add a record. Test for post request. And let's start our test. I will add dot only here. And let's say, okay, verify post request. Async. Request. Arrow function. Okay, here we go. This is our body to start the test. Now, with post request, we need to provide the information that we will be submitting. So, like we get the body back on get, but if you're creating something with post, you actually will have to add a body. So, for example, in Postman, we can select JSON and we can provide a body and send it. So it creates a record. Now, for creating a record for this API, so let's grab and see a post request on the web page. It says 404. Okay, it doesn't load. I have to remove API. Okay. So here is post, and it will create, and you can see when you create a record, it accepts name and job, and it will give you back the name and the job that you created, also an ID and stamp when. 201 response. Okay, so let's create one. So first we will have to create an object that we will be passing. So new user, and here we create an object. So name, let's say Sam, and then job, let's say QA engineer. Okay, so that's our object that we will pass. Now we can create a request and store the response, right? So create request, because when you send a request with Playwright, it will send you the response on it was actually created. Like if you provide a request, post request. So for example, here, if I'll change this to post, and I will grab the data, right? And okay, now I'm gonna, the endpoint is just users. So now I'm gonna send it to users, and I send it. It does provide the response. So we will be providing object with the request being sent, and in the same line of code, we will be saving the response that comes back. Okay, so for that, create request and save response. So let's say const response. So that's where we're gonna save it, right? Await, because it is synchronous. So await request. So we're still using this object, right? Request dot post. Now instead of get, we're using post, and we need to provide the link. And also we'll have to provide the body that we're sending. So for the link, we are using post link. So this is the one, just the user's endpoint. And we want to have a body here. And let's say data, right, is new user. So this is what I'm using to send the request. I think that looks good. Let's store the response object. So response body. So this is going to be our body that comes back without any HTML, right? And we want to parse it. So await response.json. And let's see what comes back, right? Okay, I have a typo. No. Why is it highlighting? Unexpected reserved word. Oh, I think, okay, I'm outside of the test, so it doesn't know why are we using await, because we have to be inside the test, right? This is already outside of test, just inside of describe block, but we want everything to be within the scope of this test, right? Okay, so we have response body, and let's also print it out so we can see what's actually coming back. So console log response body, right? And I'm gonna run it to see what is created. So name is Sam, job is Q engineer, there's ID and created. ID is generated randomly. When you don't know what's the ID is that's going to be returned, you can just verify that the option exists. But in our case, we're just going to verify the name and the job value. I think that's enough, and actually successful creation. So when you post, the response code will be 201, not 200. Okay, so let's do verify response. So expect response.status. So this is coming from the header. We don't have to use the body here. Dot to be 201. And then expect response body. Now we start looking into options. So in this case, we will put name dot to be new user. So from here, right? New user dot name. So we're saying the name that's coming back here is actually equal to the name in the object we created right here. Let's copy this. And here we're going to say job, right? To be new user job. And that's it. We're pretty much verified that this request created new user, and it sends back the name and the job of the user created. Okay. All right, let's do the next one. So let's verify put request. So with put, you are updating a record. So let's say a record exists. We have a user and we want to rename the user. So we're going to use put to have the name updated, right? So let's start with our test. Verify put request async can have a request from Playwright arrow function. So here's our body for the test, and we still have to create an object that we will use to update the user. So let's create an object const updated user equals and name. All right, let's call user Mr. Banana, and the job of that user is USA President. Okay. Okay, so with the object created, now we want to do the request, pass the object, and save everything into response. So do put request and save response. So const response is equal await request. Okay, we again using this one, right? Dot put. Now we need to provide, when we're doing put request, you can see there's an ID provided. So let's update user number 1. So George Bluth. Okay, user number 1. Here, after the link, we need to provide the object. So data updated user. Okay. And we're gonna save body from parsed response, raw response. Response, await response, synchronous dot JSON. Okay, let's print it out and see what we got. Console.log response body. All right, so I'm gonna run this test. And we got name and the job updated. Perfect. So all we need to do now is take the response object and verify that everything is looking as we want it, right? Verify the response. So expect response.status to be 200. Expect response body, right? Dot name to be updated user dot name, right? And same thing with the job. Let's run the test and see that if everything works. Okay, test passed. I'm gonna comment out the console output. Perfect. So we have 4 tests created. Let's do the last one. So now we will verify delete request. So test verify user is deleted, right? Async, and here we will have request. I wanted to remove that dot only because now we're gonna just run through everything, all 5 tests after we completed the test with deletion. So when you delete a record, all it does, it gives you back 204, meaning that the record is no longer there. It doesn't exist. 204 status and an empty body. So typically what you would do in a work situation, you would delete a record by ID, and then you try to get that record and verify the record is empty. Now with this API, because this API is more or less for training purposes, so the data is mocked and you can't really update it completely. Like if I delete a record and then pull it, it's still going to be there. That's just the way how the web page is set it up. So I can't impact the data behind the scenes. Only, in the moment of the response, but it's not actually not updating anything. So we're not going to verify the deletion of the object, but the normal process would be you delete and then get it again to see if it's gone. But what we will still verify that deletion actually did happen in the request itself and that we got back status code 204. So we're doing the same thing. We're saving the response. So response await request dot delete, and then you want to provide the ID of the user, right? The link, and it was the ID of the user. So I'm going to delete user 1. Okay, and if you're interested what raw response brings if you delete a user, so you can say just console log it, and let's take a look. Okay, so it has status code 204, no content. So this is your like raw response with all the HTML and headers and so on. There's no body, it's just the content coming back. So if I'll do parsing, for example, const response body is equal to response .json to parse it, and let's print the response body now. Run it. Okay, it errors out. There is nothing undefined. There's nothing coming back. So we know there's only 204 coming. Now we can say expect response dot status dot to be 204. Let's run it again. Nice, passed. I don't have to print out the console. Let's do a little formatting here so everything looks nice. Okay, and now let me just run everything. So npx playwright test. 5 tests ran through. I had some console somewhere not disabled. So okay, here it is. Printed out some console stuff. Let's rerun it. So we have just the tests. That's it. Okay. Command here, test complete, 5 tests passed. We can see our report. All 5 tests are passing. And that's it. So you can start with Playwright API automation. So again, just get Postman, run your request in Postman first if you need a response body for assertion, so you can use it as your starting point, right? That's it, we're done. Congratulations, that was, a lot of work. Great job that you finished the whole playlist. I think by now you should be confident enough to be starting at a company doing Playwright automation. The set of skills that we've built together through the videos is enough to start working and doing automation tests using Playwright. Okay, so this was Alex USA Days. Thank you for watching. Hit like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the new videos. Bye bye.